Dreamscape presents Even If It Kills Her by Kate White. Narrated by Susie Bernice. Chapter 1. I don't have a ton of regrets to show for my 36 years on the planet. But the ones that I do have seem to possess a determined and sneaky resilience. Every once in a while, say when I'm working on a crime story that's particularly soul-sucking, and I've been on the road far longer than planned, holed up in Beyoncé-style luxury at a Best Western or Doubletree Suites, one of them will resurface, like a lake snake coming up for air, raising its snout above the waterline and forcing me to stare it in the face. I regret not knowing my father well, though there was nothing I could have done about that one. He died of a brain aneurysm while on a fishing trip with a friend when I was 12. I regret, grievously, the 18-month hand grenade of a marriage I embarked on in my 20s, though I'm not sure I could have done much differently with that one either. Compulsive gamblers, I came to discover, don't fess up to their addiction when they begin to woo you, nor to the sordid fact that they'll soon be dipping into their work T&E and your jewelry box in a desperate attempt to cover their losses. And I regret that I spent over a year of my career reporting on celebrity crimes and misdemeanors, which generally involved the hurling of a cell phone at someone's head, for one of those tabloid magazines that used to be like crack for women under 50, but are now so desperate for newsstand sales that they run fake headlines like, "Kate pregnant with triplets, Palace confirms." My only defense about that one is that I needed the work. There's one regret, however, that I never had a good excuse for. When Jillian Lowe, a girl I'd become friends with sophomore year at Brown, was roused by a phone call one Friday morning during the second week of April, and was informed that her parents and 2 younger siblings had been murdered, I did nothing to comfort her. Oh, wait, excuse me. I did send a sympathy card, and I also chipped in on a floral arrangement for the private funeral service, one of those standing sprays that make it look like the coffin's just won the Kentucky Derby. But that was it, and my failure as a friend ate away at me for years. So needless to say, I was floored when Jillian showed up looking for me one Tuesday night in July, nearly 16 years later. I'd just conducted the final interview in a sold-out 4-part series called Inside the Criminal Mind at the 92nd Street Y in Manhattan. The Y's programmer had approached me a few months before, suggesting that with my crime-writing background, I was the perfect interviewer to pair with the ex-cons they'd wrangled for the program, including an infamous inside trader who'd served 7 years in prison. I jumped at the chance. This would be a way to keep momentum going on my true crime book, which was published in February. As hoped, the series garnered a ton of buzz, and I'd sold a boatload of books. However, enabling those felons to elaborate on their crimes and fluff their feathers in public had left me feeling sullied. I couldn't wait to be done with the whole thing, and when the audience Q&A portion of the final evening was over, I bolted from the stage so fast that the female con artist I'd been interviewing had probably checked her wallet. I still had to sign books in the vestibule, but that would take only 20 minutes or so. Jillian, it turned out, was waiting for me, off to the side of the book table. I couldn't see her face from my place at the table, but I remember being aware of someone's presence as I scrolled my signature. At signings, there are always a few hoverers, people unwilling to cough up $18 for your book and yet eager to request the name of your agent or suggest that you might enjoy critiquing their 600-page unpublished manuscript free of charge, because it would mean a lot to me. I signed the last book, thanked the rep from the Y for her assistance, and jumped up to leave. Before I'd taken a step, I could sense the person over my shoulder closing in. I turned, prepared to announce that I unfortunately had to dash. "Hello, Bailey," she said. It took a few beats for me to realize who she was. Once I did, my mouth dropped open as I felt a rush of both shock and delight. Neither time nor tragedy had dimmed her prettiness, I noticed, but her long blonde hair was now brunette and cut to her chin, and though her skin still had that same lovely glow, there were small crow's feet around her eyes, the kind that sprout from too much sun. Something else seemed different, too, though I couldn't put my finger on it. "Oh my gosh, Jillian, it's you," I said, finally wiping the blank look off my face. "It's really nice to see you, Bailey. Your hair, it's different. I almost didn't recognize you." At first, she didn't seem to grasp what I meant. "Oh, right," she said, lightly touching a lock by her temple. "I stopped coloring it a long time ago. And yours is short now, I see." "Yeah, I chopped it off when I hit 30, let it grow back, then cut it again just recently. I never had great hair, did I?" "At least you're a natural blonde." "Well, blondish brown." I smiled, and she smiled back. But the pleasure I'd experienced at the first sight of her was quickly shape-shifting into awkwardness. I could sense guilt creeping around the edges of my mind, trying to assert itself. "You were a lousy friend to her, Bailey. She suffered the most horrible loss, and you did close to nothing for her." Jillian, however, seemed genuinely pleased to see me. Nothing about her attitude hinted at lingering disappointment that spanned over a decade and a half. I couldn't believe I was actually setting eyes on her. Where had she been all this time? Had she been all right? "Were you here tonight at the event?" I asked. "Yes, kind of hanging in the back. I've wanted to get in touch with you, but I didn't know any other way. I was afraid if I used the contact email on your website, the message would end up in some kind of black hole." "What are you doing in the city?" "Living here, temporarily. A sublet in Williamsburg." I had no idea what she did professionally, or even if she worked. What I could surmise, just from looking at her, was that her clothes, cropped black pants, chunky-heeled sandals, and a flowy golden black top that accented her nice curves, were classy and hip, and that she probably wasn't married since there was no wedding band on the appropriate finger. "It'd be great to get together while you're here," I told her, though the idea, even while she stood right in front of me, was difficult to imagine after so many years. "Would you have time?" "Yes. I was actually thinking we could catch up tonight." She said it with what seemed like an odd casualness and disregard, as if she wouldn't have expected me to have either plans for the evening or a desire to head home. But I sensed an urgency underneath. Despite the fact that I'd promised my live-in boyfriend, Beau, that I'd decompress with him tonight on the roof deck of our apartment building, there was no way I could turn Jillian down. I wanted to know what she'd been doing, and how she'd fared in life. Besides, my guilt wasn't going to take anything but a yes for an answer. "Of course. Were you thinking of coffee? Wine?" "Either's fine." Okay. There's a cafe I noticed a block up on Lexington. They seem to do both, so why don't we try that?" It took only 5 minutes to reach the cafe, and we didn't say much on the way, just an inconsequential comment or two about how nice the summer weather had been. At about 5'3", she was roughly 3 inches shorter than me, I realized. A fact I hadn't recalled. Her presence had always read so large to me. We settled at a table at the back, and each of us ordered a glass of red wine. She then excused herself, saying she needed to use the restroom. While she was gone, I texted Beau, telling him that we'd have to bag the roof deck tonight because I'd run into a long-lost friend and would explain more about it later. Long-lost friend. Did I have the right to call her that? She certainly hadn't strayed far from my memory, nor had the grisly crime at the center of her life. Even after all these years, the details of the murders were still vivid in my mind, as I'm sure they were for people who lived in or near Dorey, Massachusetts, one of a series of towns and villages in the Berkshire Mountain region. Jillian's parents, her younger brother Danny and sister Julia, a Barnard College freshman at home recuperating from mono, had been stabbed to death late one night by a teenage boy from their neighborhood who apparently had developed an obsession with Julia. At the time of the killings, I'd agonized over what Jillian must have been going through. Though we'd known each other for only 5 or 6 months, we'd grown close. In addition to living a few doors down from each other in the dorm, we were both in the same late-afternoon sociology class and had settled into a routine of splitting a pizza afterward while trying to decode the ramblings of our professor. I could still recall Jillian wagging a pizza slice one night and exclaiming, "That man is going to drive me into the arms of animal research." She had a magnetic confidence, as well as a wry sense of humor and a contagious, carefree laugh. It was my first realization that science majors could possess a wicked sense of humor. I didn't see her before she took off for Dorey that morning, and though I had every intention of calling her, I nervously kept putting off the task. I mean, what in the world would I say? I suppose I could blame it on being 20 and having less than perfect social skills. Yet I think it had more to do with having lost my father as young as I did. His death for me had been like falling overboard in the middle of the sea and watching the ship pull farther and farther away as I bobbed helplessly in the waves. For a long time, the mere topic of death left me tongue-tied, and I was totally lame at comforting the bereaved, though that's hardly justification. Several days passed, and it grew harder and harder to phone Jillian. I promised myself I would make it up to her when she returned to campus. But she never came back. She dropped out of college, and the next I heard she was living on the West Coast. By then, I was too ashamed to reach out. 5 minutes later, Jillian settled back at the table. I realized I wasn't yet used to her no longer being a blonde. She took a quick sip of wine and smiled, with warmth that I could also see in her deep blue eyes. There was still no sign that she was holding my past failing against me. "Just so you know," she said, "I didn't buy your book tonight, because I already own it. I thought it was terrific, Bailey." "That's really nice of you to say." The book, A Model Murder, explored the homicide of supermodel Devon Barr at a country house where I'd also been a guest at the time of her death. I was touched by the fact that Jillian had read it, that she wanted to connect with me again. "Of course at school people were sure you'd be a writer one day, but I guess we just didn't know it would be about crime. How did you end up going in that direction?" I weighed my words before I spoke. Though her question didn't seem loaded, we were on weird terrain, considering the tragedy in her life. My standard reply is that when someone in 9th grade started leaving anonymous nasty notes for me, I played detective and figured out who it was, and that gave me a love for that sort of thing. But that's only part of it. Right after Brown, I got a job at a newspaper in Albany, and they put me on the police beat. One thing kind of led to another. "And now you're focusing on books?" "Right. I used to write mostly for magazines. I even had part-time gigs at a few, but print opportunities are drying up thanks to the internet." "And you're married, right? I remember hearing once that you were." "Well, briefly. But it didn't work out, to say the least. I'm living with someone now, though. A nice guy. His name's Bo Regan. But enough about me. I want to hear about you." She cocked her head and glanced off for a moment, the expression in her eyes